the work. Mike Kent is with us, former superintendent. Are you still in consulting, or are you just fishing, or what are you doing now?
A very tiny bit of consulting work.
Yeah.
Lots of fishing.
Lots of fishing. Philip said mass murderers should not be mentioned by name. I believe that encourages copycat murders. Well, a lot of people think that. It's such a big story, it's hard not to do that, to keep it closed or concealed. Kyle said, where does an 18-year-old working at a Burger King get $4,000 to spend over 3 days? A very, very good point. Robert from Oak Grove said, all schools need to be secured. No reason not to be. What do you think? You've been there. You've done this for a large school district. Why don't we have police officers at all of these schools?
Well, I think the first answer to that, or the first question you have to ask, is people are going to know who's going to pay for that police officer. Is this going to be a function of the municipality where the school exists, or is this going to be a function that the school district is going to pay for this? Is going to somehow reduce a teacher unit, do away with a teacher unit, and instead hire policemen? So that's the first question that's going to be asked. The way I would respond to that is, in Madison, we tried to develop a relationship with the county sheriff's office and the municipal police forces, such that if we picked the phone up, there was an ask for law enforcement presence, there was a police car sliding to a halt within 60 seconds. We had an outstanding law enforcement community there, and they were great to work with, extremely responsive, and extremely sensitive to the nature of a school and how they needed to conduct themselves in a school environment. Am I making any sense?
No, you are, but I don't think it's going to work in many different places. Certainly, the more rural you get, then you have a problem. Plus the fact that everybody's going to tell you, and you know this, that means that the perpetrator could get inside, so the law enforcement getting there 5 seconds or 60 seconds later, they've got to go inside where he's shooting.
That's right. And so what we discovered, and I think this continues to hold true, is that the very best defense you have is relationships. Every issue, every dangerous situation that we thwarted during my time came by an alert from a student. And so teachers and administrators having great relationships with their students, the students are the very best source of information you have.
Absolutely.
And that's where we were most successful. Now, in this particular situation in Uvalde, those elementary kids didn't know that guy, that perpetrator.
No.
But there were people, I guarantee you, there were people in Uvalde, Texas, that knew that this young man was dangerous, and somehow that information didn't get to the proper place in time.
Well, to have stopped the purchase of that gun, here's what gets me when these people start using this for politics. To stop the purchase of that gun, maybe he was a loner. There's no law being against being a loner. Maybe he had a temper when he was a kid. There's no law against that. So if he didn't have anything on his record, he just turned 18 years old, and he bought these things legally wherever he got the money, then how many other people in America are you going to have to stop buying guns, whether it's a handgun or an AR-15 or whatever it happens to be? It's just not practical to say that and still have the freedoms, as you said before. But it does worry me that we can't somehow figure this thing out about a police officer and a police. See, Mike, I just think it solves two different problems. Whether you're getting to a rural minority school or an urban school, having a police officer does more than it. I think parents will feel safer when he is at the door. I think that turns back 90% of the people who are going to try to get in. Secondly, I think they are like a human resource. They sit there and they improve like a cop on the beat. They get to know the kids, and it makes that relationship with the officers, a police officer, something that's part of their school. I think we just spent $60 to $80 billion on Ukraine. We spent billions and billions, actually trillion, on COVID. And we know from testimony in Congress, billions of that were either stolen, misspent, not spent, or misappropriated. So we ought to come up with it one way or the other. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you make a great point. When there's that kind of money out there, then it's hard to argue that you can't find a way to put a law enforcement officer in every school. So that's a pretty strong argument for sure.
Armed staff members at schools educate some of the staff members on how to handle a gun and post signs around the campus that the staff disarm. Matt in Newside. Matt makes a very good point. There are two things that these pictures you look at, and some people see one thing, some people see the other, or you hear something different. Liberals have a way of hearing things so much differently than conservatives. There are two things that they just cannot assimilate in their brains. In schools, it is a good idea to wear more guns in schools, not less guns. They'll have a nervous. They might get a rash from me just saying that. In schools, where appropriate, where people are trained, where you have ex-military or ex-police officers or people who are former police officers or who know what they're doing, more guns can keep your kids safe. The other thing is no seatbelts in a school bus is better than seatbelts in a school bus. They cannot assimilate those two things.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah. What do you think we ought to do from here on, though? I mean, what's next on this one? If we did, those police officers or sheriff deputies during the summertime, there's almost always more shenanigans going on. They can revert back to the police department or the sheriff's office. So you're saying the major culprit there is finding out who's going to pay for it.
I think so. I mean, I think that would be the very first question that the if you had all the county sheriffs in a room somewhere and you said, okay, guys, you need to assign an officer to every school in your county. The first thing they would say is, well, I don't have the manpower. Where's the manpower going to come from? Yep. And so I think, Paul, after all of these horrific events, we always have this knee-jerk reaction about what are we going to do? What are we going to do? But the conversation does not continue. And so I think that's what's got to happen is the conversation has got to continue. This is a problem. We got to figure it out. We got to address it.
We never do anything about mental illness, and in most of these cases, I mean, you got to be crazy to do what this guy just did, one way or the other. But we never address that in any form or fashion with consistency, and that's a shame. And we just try to make political points out of it, and then we wait for the next school shooting.
Unfortunately, you're correct.
Armed teachers now. I'm a teacher, and we need security. I would agree with you. I think it could easily be done. There were some other things, too, on this one, is that the laxity, as I mentioned, at that school, it's very, we got a lot of schools in this country. We got a lot of schools in the state of Mississippi. And when the earlier shooting happened, what was it, 3 years ago, and was it Sandy Hook in that school? We made a lot of different changes, and I'm hoping those changes are still being implemented. As far as you know, they are?
Yes. I think.
Go ahead, sir.
Well, I think school administrators have got a tremendous burden. You know, the educational process is a job in and of itself.
Yeah. I tell you what, Mike, can you hold on for a second here? Let me extend this interview. If you can hang on for a second, and the fishing boat is not going to pull you in too fast. Just a couple of more minutes with you, if you don't mind, sir. Hold back. A couple of more minutes here with Mike Kent. All killed were in the fourth grade. We just learned this one, Mike, that all of the fatalities were in the same fourth grade class. We also learned that Berlinda Irene Areola is a grandmother of one of the victims. She said her 10-year-old grandchild, 10 years old, was shot dead while trying to call 911 after the 18-year-old loner, Salvador Ramos, walked into the classroom armed with a handgun and rifle, told students, "You're going to die," and he opened fire. This is how cold-blooded. And again, we have no connection whatsoever. We have no idea why he did it, other than it seems he was just pushed into that school and decided to let it go. I do want to ask you this real quick, though. We have two numbers that we know, 911, 811. We know what those numbers are. We did the Amber Alert. We know all of that on the Amber Alert. And when we put that national power behind as far as public awareness, why don't we have a number like that for students to call or anybody else to call, a database that we can use that way from district to district or from state to state? Would not be a good idea.
I think it's a great idea, and just to let you know, Paul, there are school districts that have that type of situation in place, where students have the ability to communicate with administration to give administration a heads up on issues that could be threatening. So that's out there. It's not out there to the level that it probably should be, but it's out there.
Adam said, Moses said, we have 5 schools in Lawrence County that would take a police or sheriff's deputy on duty just to cover these schools, and every one of them 5, which brings back the fact that if there were people who are qualified in the school to carry a gun, and we talk about carrying a gun, I think people have a misnomer about that. In the classroom or strategic locations under a lockbox, they could have a gun and where they could get to it if need be during an emergency, not carry one on their side while they're teaching math or something. So it's people just go crazy with talking about that. Mike, I thank you, sir, very, very much. I know it's a subject that we could spend a lot of time talking about, but I do appreciate your input, and don't be a stranger. Come on back on.
Sure, and thanks for shining a light on it. Again, I think what we've got to do is continue the conversation, not let it drop, and surely this has to be one of those things that people consider to be the most important thing in our lives, is to protect our children.
Yep. Oh, thank you, sir. Appreciate it very, very much. Mike Kent, former superintendent of